Godzilla!
I don't know.
I thought you were gonna follow up with that fast or something. But...
Oh yeah, no, I didn't have anything. I didn't anticipate that one.
And neither did the audience, or maybe they did. I don't know. But anyway, so hi, welcome to Anchor Reviews. This is Tyler from Anchor Reviews,
And Stephen Lawson from the corresponding name on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and etc.
and this is our review on Godzilla Minus One. Now, what's special about this is that it's the first Japanese-made Godzilla movie in a long time since Shin Godzilla. Now, Steve and I wanted to see Shin Godzilla when that came out back in 2016, but they weren't playing that anywhere near us. But fortunately enough, they actually were able to play it at our theater, so we didn't have to go out of town with this one, which is nice because there was a pretty strong word of mouth for this one.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was very interested in this film as one of the remaining left this year. And it was, I'm glad we got to see it close to home.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a movie that's far more excitement than really any movie come out the rest of the year, especially movies that are super expensive, like that new Aquaman movie, which is supposed to lose as much money or if not more than the Marvels, or that Willy Wonka movie prequel that no one's really that hyped for. But let's bring it back to Godzilla. So Godzilla Minus One is a period piece, which makes it very unique compared to other Godzilla movies that take place either in the year they were made or in the future, that some of them were, but this one is actually going back to the past. So during the events of the final moments of World War II, Godzilla appears as a giant, dinosaur-like creature that was, fabled and known by local sailors. And then after the war is over with, there's atomic testing done in the Pacific, and of course it mutates Godzilla, and it becomes this huge giant monster that can breathe atomic breath. And we have this main character now. I don't know who the actor who played him, or with the whole cast. I'm not even going to try to pronounce their names. I'm just going to butcher it up, as you may know how I'm not very good at names. So I'm going to try. So I'm going to just say our main character is someone who was a kamikaze pilot, and he is haunted not just for thinking he failed to live up to his duties, but also failing to stop Godzilla before he became an even bigger threat. And the movie, as well, is directed, written, and also the effects of this movie are done by the same guy as well, which makes it very unique. So anyway, what did you think of Godzilla Minus One?
Yeah, a lot to be said there. I definitely liked more than I didn't like about this film. It did feel... I haven't seen every Godzilla movie, but I've seen the original and all the modern ones and Shin Godzilla, stuff like that. So I have some experience, and this film definitely felt like it was harkening back a lot to the early Godzilla in terms of design and even the state of the world and the culture kind of being World War II, result of the bomb type of stuff going on, but with more of a focus on, I guess, the very early beginning, which was interesting as a take on Godzilla. We're used to basically just seeing him emerge and tower over everything immediately, and not to say that he doesn't, because he's always a big lizard, but he definitely felt a little more vulnerable early on, as Tyler was talking about, at the early part of the film. And in the latter half of the film, it definitely seemed to be kind of not just an escalating problem based on what has the government done by dropping bombs, but what has this guy personally allowed to happen by not manning up and fighting the fight that he should have in the first place and letting his friends die, or at least his comrades, his countrymen. So I thought that the human story element in this film was pretty compelling, pretty depressing and disastrous in a lot of places, but I thought it was fitting, and it felt very personal in a way that a lot of the other Godzilla movies have this sort of now let's go to the politics department and um, let's talk to the scientists and deploy the military and all that stuff. And that stuff in a lot of Godzilla movies starts to kind of just turn blech to me. And I think a lot of people, this will feel more personal. Although by the end of the film, I don't know, I felt kind of like the humans got more in this movie than Godzilla did. And that to me felt like a slightly off kilter for what I prefer. Obviously, dealing with the giant monster versus the human element in these movies is a delicate thing, as to not, upset, and you want to like appeal to the old fans, but draw in potential prospects as well, without compromising the value of the film, ideally. And I think that this was somewhat of a narrative gamble, I guess I would put it. And for me, for that reason, I think it's a little bit... let me be clear. If you're invested in stories that are very character-driven and focus on humans in catastrophe, I think you'll probably like this more than a lot of the other Godzilla movies. But I personally always felt an investment towards Godzilla 2. And this movie, I did feel like Godzilla was kind of just... He's always a force of nature, but he was more just a force of nature in this film, and almost felt like he didn't really reach his full potential. And in that sense, obviously there are things we'll probably talk about in the spoiler section or whatever that, things may not be over. There may be more to talk about, but like it felt weird to me by the end. Just the power dynamic and the human element of the story kind of over Godzilla, which definitely is a choice that has been made in the past. But I would say, for example, like it left me with a similar feeling to the, I think, 1999 Godzilla.
Well, 98.
Or 98, sorry. In terms of just that, okay, so the humans are like that now? And it's not quite that bad. I don't want to overstate it. Like, that specific element is way more out of whack and campy in the 98 version. But I couldn't help but feel some drawback to that in ways that weren't my favorite. So I definitely liked this film more than that one. But I would say that, for example, Shin Godzilla, I would still prefer over this one for several reasons. And yeah, so it was a good time, but we'll talk about the elements we didn't like more, I'm sure.
Okay. So anyway, I would say that the movie itself, I'm kind of the opposite. I do prefer this over Shin Godzilla. I kind of barely remember that movie aside from a Godzilla that definitely took influence from anime, but early on kind of looked like a demonic Muppet in a way. And also, I mean, a lot of it just felt like, oh, people just in, buildings or scientist rooms just, talking, plotting, and that sort of deal. I just felt like the movie was just kind of by the numbers, at least in my opinion, of that movie. But with Shin Godzilla, what I like about this movie kind of harkens back to the original, and I would even dare say the 2019 Godzilla King of the Monsters movie, is that it does have that human element that really draws you in, because you're seeing the effects of what a giant monster will do. And I think the best part of the movie is not just the moment where Godzilla is attacking a city and it plays that incredible, Godzilla theme music, but also there's something that happens to this character that you really tugs at your heartstrings, and how he reacts in that moment. I think that was really the peak of the movie, in my opinion. And I think the movie kind of dips a bit too much, where there's a long gap in time between that and the climax of the movie, where I'm like, we could have had another little bit of Godzilla to
Yep.
kind of go in between in that. We could have used a little bit more, Godzilla, just one scene, I would say. But I would say this movie generally does a better job of handling Godzilla's screen time and his presence better than the 2014 Godzilla, where they really mishandled the screen time. And the characters weren't that interesting for the most part, minus, well, Bryan Cranston's from that movie, and kind of Ken Watanabe, who was, nicely expanded upon in Godzilla King of the Monsters. But the thing is that with this movie, I really liked how we had this narrative of this guy being haunted by his own struggles they had throughout the war, and how that carried on throughout afterwards, and how he faced that throughout, which was really beautifully done, I would say, and how he was rebuilding his life and what he was trying to do to move on. And all these other people come together to try to do that as well. And for the most part, I think a lot of the effects in this movie were very good, especially for a movie that cost apparently between $15 and $30 million to make. I mean, there's a few shots where they kind of look like PS5 graphics, mainly the tanks, I think, and maybe a few shots of how maybe Godzilla moved in a few shots, looked a little bit like they could have been, maybe the frame rate could have been better. But for the most part, I would say this movie looks way better, especially for its budget, compared to a lot of mainstream Hollywood movies where the effects don't look finished. And it's not just live action movies, but even animated movies too. That Disney movie Wish, there's been animators, well, supposedly from Disney who want to remain anonymous, who has said that this movie got hijacked, and even a former Disney animator has observed the trailer to that movie and says that this movie does not look finished at all. Like, even watching the trailers for the movie, I'm like, yeah, the frame rate's off, and everything about it just looks unfinished for a movie that had like a $200 million price tag, roughly speaking. And also, too, back to where you were mentioning about the Godzilla 1988 movie, ironically, when I was looking at the design of Godzilla in this movie, I saw elements of the original Godzilla, especially with the roar, which is great, and also kind of the 1980s design of Godzilla from like the second series. But also in the feet early on, I was pointing out how Godzilla's feet, at least in his early form that we saw, reminded me of the 1998 Godzilla's feet in a way. And you know how a lot of people for a long time were pretty anti-CGI for a while, and I think this meme perfectly encapsulates this, like CGI everywhere. I love how it's the 1988 Godzilla. And the thing is that I remember a while back people would be very anti-CGI, but a lot of people who are in the industry are not really anti-CGI or everything CGI, everything, but they're pro CGI. They just feel like it's a tool to use if everything else can't be done, like is a last resort thing. Like even Rick Baker, who is this accomplished multi-Academy Award-winning special makeup artist, he said that he's pro CGI, but only when it's really necessary to do so. And I noticed how with Toho, they're known for their monsters and their suits and that, but with this one, you could tell that they went into the computer-generated route. We kind of saw that a little bit of Shin Godzilla, but definitely embraced that more in this one, Godzilla Minus One. And Godzilla looked great for the most part in this movie, and I feel like it's just a way to use every trick in the book. And again, this movie cost a very low budget compared to what the other movies are coming out now, and especially like this is kind of similar to The Creator, where that movie looks great, but yet it costs only about $80 to $86 million to make. And I think Hollywood needs to really take a serious look at this movie and The Creator and say, going forward, we need to be more careful with our budgets. We need more conservative in that approach. And there's ways we can have our cake and eat it, and we don't have to bet the farm on every single movie. And I think what helped the cost down with this movie was that you didn't really have any actors in this movie that anyone would know about, which I think benefited the movie as well. It wasn't distracting, so that way it made it the human element very relatable to that in a way.
Yeah, I would agree with quite a bit of that, especially the CGI argument. And Godzilla overall looked very good in this film. There were only a few spots where you could definitely tell just something was minorly off. And one of my, I guess, issues about like Godzilla feeling weirdly a little less, with a little less oomph in certain places in this film. I think that may have also been partially due to budgetary constraints, which were understandable with the budget and the story they were trying to tell. But I agree with you that largely I would much rather have experimentation like this before The Marvels 2, or something,
Yeah,
you
I
know.
think in China it was called Captain Marvel 2, but it's called The Marvels in most places.
Yeah.
Yeah, you had to watch not one, but two different shows on Disney Plus and a movie from like 4 years ago to understand what's going on.
Right. And the important things that should be taken away, I would argue, from a lot of what's quote unquote wrong with Hollywood and stuff that's going on right now. If you're in a rush to just produce schlock for the sense of making average consumable drivel to meet a quota, you're going to end up just making subpar results, rushed things that end up souring the public to your product, and then end up kind of damaging your brand in the long run. And in addition to that, the balance of CGI and practical effects is incredibly important, because the practical effects help ground and make things feel real, and then the CG can add just that little bit extra to make the magic come alive. And this and the creator, like Tyler was talking about, are phenomenal examples of the way the industry should be going. And I do think that it's hard to say where specifically it'll pop up from, if it'll be some streaming service or how, I hate this word, but content, boo, will be produced in the future. But the theatrical model, there's still a value in preserving that in experiences like the movie we saw and the movies we just spoke about. Meanwhile, I'm not so sure about that for animated Disney movie number 9 and, like I said, the Marvels or whatever. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Those are just, front of the mind examples where it's like
number 9 failure this year.
Yeah. Pay $200 million and get meh as the resounding result from it. Definitely things that the industry needs to learn. But yeah, I think we're overall in agreement about the strong suits of the movie. It's just a few differences here and there with the, I guess, the scale and the tone and some of the concept behind Godzilla.
Yeah, I remember we were talking about the state of the movies and that, and can I go on a little bit of tangent here, is that I feel like, looking back in retrospect, I feel like there were roughly 3 movies that kind of hurt movies the past 15 years or so, like successful movies. I would say one of them was The Avengers, because that movie popularized, everyone's like, oh, we gotta do a cinematic universe, we gotta rush things out. We gotta emphasize the quantity over the quality. Also, I would blame the likes of Avatar, because that made 3D popular, and then thus that made the Alice in Wonderland remake successful, and it started the tidal wave of live-action Disney remakes. And then also Harry Potter and Death Hallows Part 1 and 2, unnecessarily splitting what should have been one movie into 2 separate movies to double the profits.
Tyler, I'm sitting here thinking, I could be wrong, but maybe we've complained about each and every one of those points before they've been popular. Imagine that.
Yeah, we were ahead of the curve. Yeah, and here's another controversial opinion of mine. I think Marvel's The Avengers kind of started the downfall of the MCU was quality-wise, because you look at the other movies, they had a more interesting color palette, they weren't overly jokey, they took themselves a little bit more seriously. Starting with the Avengers is like, okay, we're going to make a joke every minute or so, and we're going to adopt this ugly, dull, grayish color palette in a way. And that's one of the things I liked about what DC was trying to do with what Zack Snyder was doing with like Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and so on, is that you had a more interesting color palette. You also had a more serious tone as kind of an antidote to what the MCU was doing, kind of like how a lot of people like Audrey Hepburn back then, because she was kind of like the antithesis of Marilyn Monroe in a way. So I feel like that could have been that, but sadly Warner Brothers was like, yeah, we gotta Marvelize, as Stephen would say, and at the time audiences weren't prepared for it. And I think nowadays, people would be more prepared for something like that. Especially Snyder's previous movie, Watchmen, was definitely ahead of its time. If it would have come out nowadays, it would do much better compared to back then.
100%. I fully agree. And while DC definitely I'm not saying it's perfect. It has made mistakes. I think that the important thing, if you are a visionary filmmaker with a story in mind, commit to that vision. Do not compromise on, well, the stockholders or the audience didn't love this aspect entirely, so you must cave into their demands. I would say that another film that, although it ended up kind of just being probably marginally better, which may have done damage in the long run, is the Sonic movie. And that's a weird one. It's, I would say, nowhere near as impactful as the others you listed, but that was, I think, if not the first movie, one of the first, where the studio caved into the demands completely of the audience. And to be clear, I'm not saying in this one regard that it didn't end up for the better, but I do think that causes a disastrous domino effect for now studios want to do that first. They want the feedback first, and they want to compromise their vision at the first possible moment to appeal to the average quote-unquote consumer, and that often will compromise artistic integrity. So I think that that is an additional element going forward that we'll see how that ends up manifesting.
Yeah. So do you want to get into spoilers now?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, just fast forward this part. Don't want to be spoiled. So the movie, so the conclusion of the story, or at least the big plan that is concocted, is that they decided they're going to get a bunch of these devices to, trap Godzilla in the ocean. They're going to sink him down fast. And if that doesn't work, they're going to try to rise him up fast as well for the, change of pressure will mess with him and hopefully kill him. But then that ends up not fully working. So ultimately, the main character decides to strap a bunch of explosives to an aircraft of his and fulfill his, I guess, what was expected of him to be a kamikaze pilot. And he crashes into, his plane crashes into Godzilla, blows him up. But it turns out that he actually, had an ejector seat with a parachute, and he's able to live. So in a way, this movie does show, yes, I mean, it's important to, value life and value the future of other generations, and also how you can, bring honor to your country, but also live at the same time as well.
That I definitely think was a very good, objectively positive takeaway, as opposed to, not that sacrifice isn't sign of valor and valuable, but there can be an unhealthy death drive in cultures that we see in history, and it's important to look at the long run of, if everyone has that mindset, there will be no future. Mm-hmm. And so that, I think, was a good, healthy lesson to take away from the film. And then, of course, there were the two minor things. I don't know if you noticed, Tyler, that they were, I think, minor nods towards there could be something in the future Godzilla-wise that I wasn't able to tell in the ocean at the end if that was his head or some eggs that were dropping off that were implying, that more Godzilla could be at play. But also on the... we're in the spoiler section, so the woman love interest that kind of started out as just a fellow disaster survivor that we thought had been dead, she survived, but she's got a little black thing on her neck. Mm-hmm. And that could be the beginning of an infection or a parasite or something caused by Godzilla or the radiation that he brought to the surface. So I think either element of those could be at play if there's any ideas for a future spin-off. But again, I don't want to read too much into that because we're just talking about original concepts and not just milking things into franchises for no reason.
Yeah, I think Shin Godzilla tried to do something similar, but that really never went anywhere. I'm not gonna hold my breath for this one either, but I'd be fine if it was just kind of a what if story, one-off thing, which I wish Hollywood would do more of that instead of everything's got to be a franchise and that. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so what did you think of What would you give this movie?
Well, I've been thinking about it for a bit, and I think for a grade, I would probably give it somewhere around an 83% because it's definitely it's good, and there's a lot I like about it, but there are certain elements to the Godzilla story that I think are not as strong to it. I think that the human, and to be clear, that is a choice. You know, that's not to say it's necessarily a fault. It's just for me not the highlight of what Godzilla can be. So I think some people will grade it a lot higher, but for me that's appropriate because the beginning and the end, as well as some pacing issues in the middle that you brought up, I think could have been executed a little better. But overall, this is still very much a film worth watching. And especially for the times that we live in, not to make, everything ever political, but there's a certain sense of like we've overcome the disaster of COVID and certain things in the world don't feel the way they should be again, and we're rebuilding. And so it's, you could say, kind of a sign of the times movie too, where they similarly are rebuilding after a much more obviously devastating catastrophe, with cities in ruin and stuff like that. So I definitely think that this is an interesting film for this time and also does a good job of hearkening back to the original. But ideally in the future, I would like some balance of this human storytelling with a Shin Godzilla-ish tone, but to be clear, not like the body transformation stuff, just the dark atmosphere, the scale. So yeah, I think that this offered a lot, but 83% is what I'd give it.
Okay. Well, personally, I think this movie was pretty good as well. I think in retrospect, I'm like, yeah, this is better than not only the 2014 Godzilla, but I would say also, Shin Godzilla, and well, easily better than any of those infamous Netflix Godzilla movies. The Godzilla Earth trilogy that was just really, especially that third one, was just super pretentious and bad and boring, all in one. And yeah, with this movie, I did like how it was an interesting period piece take on it. I like the human aspect of it too. Drama was done very well for the most part. I also liked the design of Godzilla in this movie. I liked a lot of the action, the effects, how they were able to incorporate that while also keeping the budget surprisingly low. However, I do feel like, yeah, the movie did kind of slump a bit for that gap of time. It was like, yeah, we could have used another moment of Godzilla to kind of wake us up in a way. But yeah, I also would say too that, yeah, maybe some effect shots could have been better in ways. But overall, I would say Godzilla Minus One, yeah, pretty good movie. One of the better movies I've seen this year. I wish I would have, paid money to see this again a second time than seeing that Napoleon movie in theaters, which, kind of gets worse the more I think about it, especially knowing how Ridley Scott has said some bad things about people who, like myself, are into history recently. And yeah, I kind of regret paying money to see that movie. But maybe the extended cut will be better. Who knows? Maybe I'll review that one. But yeah, Godzilla Minus One. I'm happy that I saw it in theaters. I'm happy that I finally was able to see a Toho produced Godzilla movie on the big screen for the first time, and had a lot of subtitles, to it so I can understand what's going on. So as for Godzilla Minus One, I would give it a solid 3 stars out of 4 at least, or maybe in the future I might give it 3.5 stars out of 4. But this is easily one of the best Godzilla movies I've seen, bottom line. And I definitely would recommend. I would put up there with the original Godzilla from 1954 and Godzilla King of the Monsters from 2019 as well. So easily one of the, at least one, if not one of the best Godzilla movies, one of the better Godzilla movies ever made.
I would definitely agree with that. I think our rankings are a little different, but definitely worth watching, and definitely I'd probably put in the top 5 of movies I've seen this year. There are a couple that I still have yet to see, so that list may change, but I don't anticipate it by how this year has gone. So
yeah, I mean, forget Barbenheimer. What about a double feature between Oppenheimer and this movie?
Yeah, it's a good point. Very, very good point. But.
Anyway, so this is Tyler from Anchor Reviews.
And Stephen Lawson from Stephen Lawson on YouTube.
Yes, and we hope you enjoyed this video, and we hope to make a lot more in the future. Please like and subscribe. Oh yeah, and one last thing. I think they should have played that Godzilla X Kong New Empire trailer before this movie. It would have been great marketing.
That sure would have been good marketing. I agree. Absolutely.
Yeah, that would have been a way to do like a marketing like, oh, you gotta see this exclusively in theaters only. We're not gonna release it online. You gotta go see it. So yeah, I think that would have been great, but I think it was a missed opportunity.
100%.